boys and girls. So yesterday we got to talk about fairy tales, which was another type of fiction story. And we talked about the different things that fairy tales have usually. Like once upon a time is how they usually start. And they usually end with happily ever after. And there's usually royalty somewhere in the story, right? A king and a queen and a prince, something like that. There might be a wicked character, right? Like a witch or a goblin or an ogre that lives under a bridge, or a giant. And then there's usually good characters, maybe like fairy godmothers or just regular old characters. There sometimes is magic in fairy tales. And then these kind of apply more to like folk tales that kind of fit under the fairy tale name also. Like the rule of three, that the characters learn a lesson and that there's conflict, right? There's some kind of fighting, usually good against evil. But in fairy tales, good always wins, right? That's why it's happily ever after. So yesterday I read you the book Puss in Boots, which hopefully was maybe kind of a newer type fairy tale for you guys. And I want to just talk through the graphic organizer and make sure you feel like you filled it out okay. So the setting of this story, I would say, would have been in like a kingdom or in the countryside, right? It was in the king's kingdom, but it was also in the other kingdom of the evil, what was it, the wizard, the wicked old giant, that's what it was, the wicked old giant that had magic. So they were also in his kingdom because they ended up taking over his kingdom, right? And the Marquis of Carabas claimed that that was his castle the whole time. So they were really kind of in those kingdoms, right? The characters in this setting. Well, the important characters would definitely be Puss in Boots. And then there would be the miller's son, who ended up becoming the Marquis de Carabas. And then there was the king, who had his own castle, right? That the Puss kept giving all the gifts to, and then he had a daughter. I would say all of those people are important. The king, Puss in Boots, the miller's son, the princess, and really kind of even the wicked old giant. Lots of characters in this story, okay? The problem, that might be harder for you to think about. The main problem in this story is that the miller's father only left him a cat. He only left him a Puss in Boots. Well, he wasn't even in boots at the time. He was just a cat. And the miller's son was kind of like, you know, what am I supposed to do with this cat? How am I going to be successful in life with just a cat? So that was the problem. The solution later was that the cat was able to kind of trick his way into making the miller's son become the Marquis de Carabas and become like his own king, right? And marry a princess. So that was the solution. Now the magic, that was with that wicked giant, right? He was magic because he could change into different animals. And that's how the Puss in Boots ended up tricking him, right? He changed him into a mouse. He convinced the mean old giant to turn into a mouse, and then he ate him, right? Okay, happily ever after. Who lived happily ever after? Well, the miller's son and then the princess lived happily ever after, right? And Puss in Boots did too, really. So that was that story, okay? So today I'm going to read you a different one. This is one of my favorites. I love this story. It's called Rumplestiltskin. It is another fairy tale, but also one that is not told very often. I'm trying to pick fairy tales that are not Disney movies because Disney likes to retell fairy tales and turn them into movies, which is great, but you guys all know those. And I'm trying to teach you different ones, okay? So this one, Rumplestiltskin, here we go. Once upon a time, there was a poor miller whose only treasure was his beautiful daughter. I already see something in common. They both start with a miller and their children, right? Do you know what a miller is? It's a person who gets like wheat or collects grain and then puts it in the mill and grinds it into flour. Okay, here we go. Now, it happened that the miller had to go on an errand to the king. The miller wanted to make himself appear important, so he said, "Well, I have a daughter who can spin straw into gold." "Well, that is a marvelous art," replied the king. "If your daughter is as clever as you say, bring her to my palace tomorrow, and I will put her to a test." When the king said that, the miller regretted his boast, but he knew he must obey the king's command. So he kind of told a little fib, and now they're calling him out. As soon as the miller's daughter arrived at the palace, the king took her into a room which was full of straw. He gave her a spinning wheel and some bobbins and said, "Now set to work. And if by dawn tomorrow you have not spun this straw into gold, you must die." He locked the door and left the miller's daughter alone in the room. There she sat, for she had no idea how straw could be spun into gold. And as the hours passed, she grew more and more frightened. At last, she began to weep. All at once the door opened, and in came a little man. "Good evening," he said. "Why are you crying so?" "Alas," answered the girl, "I have to spin straw into gold, and I do not know how to do it." "What will you give me," said the little man, "if I do it for you?" "My necklace," said the girl. And the little man took the necklace and seated himself in front of the wheel. Whir, 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 it went, and in 3 turns the bobbin was full. He put on another, and whir, 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 the second bobbin was full too. And so it went until dawn, when all the straw was spun and all the bobbins were full of gold. And then the little man slipped out the door. Oh my goodness, so he took all this straw and turned it into gold on a spinning wheel. When the king arrived and saw the gold, he was astonished and delighted, but his heart only became more greedy. He had the miller's daughter taken into a larger room, which was also full of straw. "If you value your life," he said, "you must spin this straw into gold by dawn tomorrow." The miller's daughter looked at the pile of straw and began to cry. Just then, the door opened, and the little man appeared again. "What will you give me," said the little man, "if I spin this straw into gold for you?" "The ring on my finger," answered the girl. The little man took the ring and began to turn the wheel again. By the next morning, he had spun all the straw into glittering gold. The king rejoiced at the sight, but was still not satisfied. He had the miller's daughter taken into an even larger room full of straw, and he said, "You must spin this too in the course of a night, and if you succeed, you shall be my wife." As he locked the door, he thought, "She may only be a miller's daughter, but I am sure I could not find a richer wife in the whole world." This king is not very nice, is he? No, I do not like him. When the girl was alone, the little man came for the 3rd time and said, "What will you give me if I spin this straw for you also?" "I have nothing of value left," said the girl. "Then promise to me, if you should become queen, to give me your first child." "Well, who knows whether that will ever happen?" thought the miller's daughter. So, not knowing how else to help herself, she promised to give the little man what he wanted. Grinning, he sat down at the wheel and once more spun the straw into gold. When the king came in the morning, he saw all the gold, and he arranged a grand marriage, and the beautiful miller's daughter became the queen. A year later, the queen gave birth to a beautiful baby daughter, and she was so happy with the child that she never once thought about the little man. But one day he suddenly appeared in her room and said, "Now give me what you promised." The queen was horrified and offered the little man all the riches of the kingdom if he would let her keep the child. But the little man said, No, something alive is dearer to me than all the treasures in the world. And at that, the queen began to sob so loudly that the little man took pity on her. I will give you 3 days, he said. If by the end of that time you find out my name, then you shall keep the child. The queen stayed up the whole night thinking of all the names she had ever heard, and she sent a messenger out to search far and wide for other names. And when the little man came in the palace the next day, the queen began with Casper, Melchior, Balthazar, and then she said all the names she knew, one after another, but to each one the little man said, "That is not my name." On the second day, the queen learned the names of everyone living near the palace. And when the little man came again, she selected the most unusual ones. Perhaps your name is Short Ribs, she said, or Sheepshanks, or Lace Leg. But the little man always answered, "That is not my name." On the third day, the messenger returned and told the queen, I have not been able to find a single new name, but as I approached a high mountain at the end of the forest, I saw a little house. And before the house a fire was burning, and around about the fire a little man was jumping, and he hopped first on one leg and then the other, and he shouted, "Today I brew, tomorrow I bake, the next day the young queen's child I'll take. Soon far and wide will spread the fame that Rumplestiltskin is my name." How glad the king was when she heard the messenger's story. She repeated the name Rumplestiltskin over and over, and soon afterward the little man came in and asked, "Now, queen, what is my name?" At first she said, "Is it Conrad?" "No." "Is it Harry?" "No." "Then perhaps your name is Rumplestiltskin." "The devil told you that! The devil told you that!" cried the little man. And in his rage, he stamped his right foot on the ground so hard that he sank to his waist, and then he stamped his left foot so hard that he disappeared from sight. The earth fell in on top of him, and Rumpelstiltskin was never seen again. Oh, now that one didn't actually say happily ever after, did it? But I think it started with once upon a time. Yes, it did. And I think somebody does end up happily ever after in this story. Kind of. This story is kind of strange, right? And very interesting. But I hope you can think about the setting, who the characters are, what the main problem was, and the solution of the problem, and what magic there was, because there was magic, and then who ended up living happily ever after. Who would you say ended living happily ever after? Okay? And then we're going to learn about a different type of story tomorrow.